Hello and welcome to today's episode of Crime Uncovered, where we explore some of the most notorious and baffling cases in history, and today we're going to talk about one of the most infamous serial killers of all time, the Zodiac Killer. The Zodiac Killer was a mysterious and elusive murderer who terrorized Northern California in the late 1960s and early 1970s. He claimed to have killed 37 people, but only 5 deaths and 2 injuries have been confirmed by the authorities. He taunted the police and the public with cryptic letters, ciphers, and phone calls, in which he revealed details of his crimes, threatened more violence, and mocked his pursuers. He gave himself the name Zodiac, and signed his messages with a symbol resembling a crosshair. He was never caught, and his identity remains unknown to this day. The Zodiac Killer case has fascinated and frustrated generations of investigators, journalists, and amateur sleuths. It has inspired countless books, movies, podcasts, and theories. It has also sparked controversy and debate over the validity of the evidence, the reliability of the witnesses, and the credibility of the suspects. In this episode, we will try to unravel the mystery of the Zodiac Killer and examine the facts, the clues, the suspects, and the theories behind this enduring enigma. But before we dive into the details, let's start from the beginning. How did the Zodiac Killer saga begin? When and where did he strike for the first time? And who were his first victims? The first confirmed murder attributed to the Zodiac Killer occurred on December 20, 1968, on a remote road near Benicia, California. That night, 2 high school students, David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen, went on their first date. They attended a Christmas concert at their school, and then drove to a local restaurant for a snack. Around 10:30 p.m., they decided to park at a Lover's Lane spot on Lake Herman Road, a secluded area surrounded by fields and hills. Little did they know that someone was watching them. A dark car, possibly a Chevrolet Impala, pulled up behind them and turned off its lights. The driver got out of the car, armed with a .22 caliber semi-automatic pistol, and approached the young couple. He fired several shots at the back of their car, shattering the rear window. David, who was sitting in the driver's seat, was shot in the head and killed instantly. Betty Lou, who was sitting next to him, tried to escape, but was gunned down as she ran. She was shot 5 times in the back, and died on the spot. The killer then got back into his car and drove away, leaving behind a horrific scene of blood and bullets. A few minutes later, a woman who lived nearby heard the gunshots and called the police. The authorities arrived at the scene and found the bodies of the 2 teenagers. They also found several bullet casings and tire tracks, but no other clues or witnesses. The motive for the killing was unclear, and the identity of the killer was unknown. The police launched an investigation, but they had little to go on. They interviewed the friends and families of the victims, but they could not find any connection or conflict that could explain the murder. They checked the criminal records and the mental health histories of the local residents, but they could not find any suspects or leads. They also looked into other unsolved murders in the area, but they could not find any similarities or patterns. The case remained a mystery, and the killer remained at large. The murder of David Faraday and Betty Lou Jensen was the first in a series of brutal and baffling attacks that would terrorize Northern California for the next several years. The killer would strike again and again, targeting young couples in isolated locations and leaving behind a trail of death and terror. He would also communicate with the authorities and the media, claiming responsibility for his crimes, and challenging them to catch him. He would become known as the Zodiac Killer, and he would become one of the most notorious and elusive serial killers of all time. The police had no leads or suspects, and the case remained unsolved. The killer remained silent and dormant for 6 months, until he struck again on July 4, 1969, in Vallejo, California, about 20 miles away from the first crime scene. That night, another young couple, Michael Mago and Dorleen Ferrin, were sitting in a parked car at the Blue Rock Springs Park, a popular Lover's Lane spot. Around midnight, a car drove up behind them and turned off its lights. The driver got out of the car, armed with a 9mm Luger pistol, and walked towards them. He shone a flashlight into their eyes, and without saying a word, he opened fire. He shot both of them several times, and then returned to his car and drove away. Michael, who was 19 years old, was shot 4 times in the face, neck, chest, and shoulder. Dorleen, who was 22 years old, was shot 5 times in the back, chest, and arm. She died on the way to the hospital. Michael survived, but suffered severe injuries and trauma. He later described the killer as a white male, about 26 to 30 years old, with short, light brown curly hair, and a large face. About 40 minutes after the shooting, the Vallejo Police Department received a phone call from a man who claimed to be the killer. He said, "I want to report a murder. If you will go 1 mile east on Columbus Parkway, you will find kids in a brown car. They were shot with a 9mm Luger. I also killed those kids last year. Goodbye." The caller then hung up. The police traced the call to a phone booth at a gas station, about 3 blocks from Darlene's home, and only a few minutes from the crime scene. The caller had apparently used a pay phone to make the call, and had left no fingerprints or other evidence behind. The police were stunned by the call, and by the apparent connection to the Lake Herman Road murders. They realized that they were dealing with a serial killer, who had not only killed 2 couples in cold blood, but had also taunted them with a phone call, and had taken credit for both crimes. They wondered why he had waited 6 months to kill again, and why he had chosen to reveal himself now. They also wondered if he would strike again, and if so, when and where. They did not have to wait long for an answer. On July 31, 1969, 3 Bay Area newspapers received identical letters from someone who claimed to be the killer. The letters were addressed to the editors of the San Francisco Chronicle, the San Francisco Examiner, and the Vallejo Times-Herald. The letters were handwritten in capital letters with misspellings and grammatical errors. The letters began with the phrase, "This is the Zodiac speaking." The letters contained details of the murders that only the killer would know, such as the type of weapon, the number of shots, and the brand of ammunition. The letters also contained a cryptic message, consisting of 408 symbols, arranged in 17 columns and 24 rows. The symbols looked like a combination of letters, numbers, and signs, such as circles, crosses, and triangles. The letter stated that the cryptogram contained the killer's identity, and that he would not give up killing until the newspapers published the code. The letters also stated that the killer was collecting his victims as slaves for the afterlife, and that he enjoyed killing because it was fun. The letters ended with a symbol resembling a crosshair, which would become the killer's signature. The newspapers were shocked and intrigued by the letters, and decided to publish them, along with the cryptogram, on their front pages. They also contacted the police, and shared the letters with them. The police were skeptical and suspicious of the letters, and wondered if they were a hoax or a prank. They also doubted that the cryptogram contained any meaningful information, and suspected that it was a random assortment of symbols, designed to confuse and frustrate them. They tried to crack the code, but they had no success. They also asked the public for help, and invited anyone who could solve the cryptogram to contact them. The letters and the cryptogram sparked a frenzy of interest and curiosity among the public, and generated hundreds of tips and leads for the police. Many people tried to decipher the code, using various methods and techniques, but none of them could find a clear and consistent solution. The killer remained a mystery, and his identity remained hidden. He had challenged the authorities and the media, and had shown his intelligence and cunning. He had also shown his arrogance and cruelty, and had announced his intention to kill again. He had become known as the Zodiac Killer, and he had become one of the most notorious and elusive serial killers of all time. But who was he? Why did he kill? How did he create the code? And what did it mean? These are the questions that we will try to answer in the next segment as we explore the history, the evidence, the suspects, and the theories of the Zodiac Killer case. Stay tuned for more, after this short break.